Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
With fall rolling in and football on many American television screens and devices, it's only fitting that we start today's AmericanaMusic.com podcast introducing a first draft pick for the Cincinnati Bengals, who is also part of the NFL's elite All-Pro in 72 and 73. Later retiring from football in 1980, he went on to pursue songwriting. That songwriter is Mike Reid. The Nashville Songwriters Hall of Famer has written countless monster hits for country artists including Ronnie Milsap, Conway Twitty, Don Williams, the Judds, Alabama, Kenny Rogers, Tim McGraw, the gigantic hit for Bonnie Raitt, I Can't Make You Love Me, and that's only scratching the surface. The other half of the duo, Joe Henry, has penned 16 critically acclaimed solo albums and is a Grammy-winning producer and has produced for artists such as Solomon Burke, Elvis Costello, and Bonnie Raitt. And just this past week, he was a Lifetime Achievement honoree at the Americana Music Awards. Together through the label 30 Tigers, they have just released a collaborative album called Life and Time, and we are so excited to have them on our show. Welcome, Mike and Joe.
Nice to be with you.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Can you talk about how this collaboration came about? I'm curious how you guys met. Were you already working together, or did one reach out to the other? How did this collaboration happen between you guys?
Sure. I'll try to tell this long story in an abbreviated form. We did not know each other personally before August of 2022, though I certainly knew who Mike was as a songwriter. But we met teaching at Rodney Crowell's songwriting camp, which was hosted on the campus at Vanderbilt in August of 2022. And we, just by pure happenstance, on the first evening of the gathering, wound up walking across the grass to the dining hall on the first evening together, got in line for food together and sat at the same table, and immediately fell into a conversation about poets that we love in common. Subsequent days, I would always find myself looking for Mike for a coffee at break time because I so enjoyed talking to him. But then months went by after camp broke, and one day, randomly, I was doing something or other and heard the beginning of a song take shape in my mind and instinctively stopped what I was doing, texted Mike, reminded him who I was in case he forgot, and asked if he might like to try to write something together. I wound up sending him a complete lyric. I didn't know if it was complete, but I sent him a full structure of a song, and his response 24 hours later was to send back not only a finished song, but a really beautiful and soulful recording of it. And I played it for my wife. She cried. She said, whatever this is, you guys need to try to do this again. We did. It happened exactly that same way. No conversation. I just sent words. He sent back a finished recording of a finished song. And then we just never stopped.
Wow. Wow.
Your intro, Sarah, would indicate a lot to me. It would indicate that Joe and I, obviously, before we met in the Rodney Crowell camp, we had come from different disparate worlds.
Yes.
I certainly knew who Joe was. I was shocked that he would have a clue as to me because I was a songwriter writing, that's essentially what I wanted. And certainly coming from the athletic world, that's a long, long, long time ago. I was reticent. Joe he says he wanted to have coffee on those breaks. And I was reticent because I held him in such high regard, his work and his words, in the way I do my very favorite poets. I could see where I could easily annoy him. But we would end up, and the first lunch we had, Sarah, I'm sure you've had this experience where you meet somebody and you think, oh, I've known them really my whole life.
Yeah.
It remains one of my favorite things. It remains a mystery how disparate worlds can intersect and produce a kind of third thing, an entity that creates something that neither one of us would have.
Yeah, single shared creative voice.
Yeah.
It's like harmony singers. There's a third voice that emerges. Not
That's
just
right.
two voices together. When people are singing harmony in a particularly compelling way, there is a third entity that is in evidence. And I feel like that happens with us as I think it happens with any successful writing duo. Now, I've written with people all through my working life, but always one-off kind of circumstantially driven collaborations. Like I'm producing a record and just there's work that needs to be done on a song. I get invited to do some work on it, and I've written with, Rodney Crowell and Roseanne Cash and Madonna and, random things that come come up, but not as a sustained engagement. Writing has always been a very solitary act for me when it really comes down to it. So to find myself at this point of my working life, 40 years into so-called career, to be not only engaged, but profoundly engaged in a writing collaboration, it's not just that it's half the work. It's just that I'm learning to hear the way that songs happen for me in a completely different tonality. And it's a complete gift at this stage of my working life to get out of my own way musically and hear something else, hear another way in that might be just my default mode. You know, Mike comes deeply out of classical music and as far as study. My study, primitive as I am as a studier, you know, I come out of a folk blues tradition. My melodic sensibility gives evidence to that. Mike has shown me a different way songs that involve me might be articulated. Anything in life that offers you a new perspective is most often a gift.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. So on this album, was it a majority of, Joe, your writings, or is it a collaborative?
I wrote all the words and Mike wrote all the music.
Oh, okay.
Sure. I might say the most I would say about a lyric, if I come to a melodic thing that I thought it would be nice if we could maintain that. Joe, could you give me one more syllable here? Joe, could you give me one less syllable there? But other than that, they were Joe's words, and I was dreamed of working with words like those. You know, I write lyrics as well, but Joe's words are not what I would do.
Yeah.
Dreamed of getting to work with words like that. I tend to prattle on, Sarah, about the difference between poetry and song lyrics. They're not really the same thing. But Joe, I think more than any songwriter I can think of, Dylan, certainly, I would say, those worlds of poetry and song lyrics become very close, and that line gets very blurred with writers like that. And I just love that. I love those writers that give agency to the mystery of living and the mystery of the difficulty of being living. And the meaning of those words of people like Dylan and Joe, they're not really necessarily just on the surface. There will be a phrase, a clarifying phrase that's beautiful that anchors the thing. But the intent of those words is, I think, expressing something fundamental and deep. I feel privileged. I must say, Sarah, I'm extremely, Joe will tell you, protective of those words. He's going to go off and write with other people, undoubtedly. I'll permit that to happen as long as they understand the gift they're getting here.
One thing I wanted to talk about, the lyrics of these songs, and now that I know that Joe, you wrote the lyrics, is that I don't know whether consciously or subconsciously you use a lot of objects in your writing that have inherent symbolism. I noticed that. For example, words like bridges, houses, ghost, storm, door, like they all have kind of double meaning and can be symbolic to people. And it's very cool and very catching. Can you talk a little bit about the line between making a relatable and universal yet personal, the lyrics?
I can sort of talk about it from at this moment, standing away looking at it like you are. It's not something I am conscious of when I'm working. Anybody asking me to think about that while I'm working is like asking a tightrope walker to look at his feet. You're just going to lose balance and fall. I don't want to be aware. As my son Levi said, Dad, shoes, gloves, hats, and birds, that's pretty much your thing. Yeah, there are images that seem to reoccur that are ripe with as images that go beyond their literal meaning. You know, rivers, storms, they're things that I feel like I should move away from because I leaned into them so hard, except that they are perfect metaphors and very flexible ones for the ways in which we navigate the stories that are our lives. It's not my fault if a river is a perfect image for time and what it means to try to swim within it. And it's also about using a shared vocabulary, you know, with a listenership.
Yeah.
If I was the kind of clever writer, you know, if I was Borges and you're like, you're kind of reinventing language, if you're so brilliant as to move beyond what becomes a shared language, you leave people behind. But you use conversational imagery and phrasing because it's familiar. People could then hear what you're actually trying to say that might not be what they hear routine. You know, my best example of that is the great so-called modern painters of the early last century. Just look at Picasso and Matisse. You know, they were playing with familiar form. Nude on a chaise, you know, a vase of flowers, a bowl of fruit, a portrait. They didn't care. care. Picasso's attitude was, I don't care what my subject is. I'm going to speak like I speak. And because you know what a vase of flowers looks like, you'll see how expansive my mind is. Because I'm using a familiar form, you can understand what I'm saying with it, even if it's outside of what you anticipated. Is that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, completely.
I don't want to breach the wall in terms of conversational tone I hope to strike. I want to speak in ways that people believe they understand me, even if they don't fully. Because sometimes what's to be understood is not just about translating something into clearer words. People get confused when an artist is abstract on purpose with words, because they tend to think words are something that's already supposed to be breaking down the blurriness of this. It's already supposed to be the translation. If you're using words deliberately to create darkness and shadow, it can confuse some people who are trying to read it like a telegram.
Mm-hmm.
I just come from a different tradition. I like being confused. I like being disoriented as an artist and as a listener.
If I could just add one thing, Sarah.
Yeah.
You said your feeling about how you read those words. I think that's vital. These kinds of words summon us to participate in the encounter. And I can't think of any other way to participate in encountering what it must have been like those early paintings, Joe, or Wallace Stevens' poem, or Dylan's early Joe's stuff. They summon the listener to open up the bags of your own life on the experience, so that it's not, I don't understand what Joe means. I don't always understand every single phrase Joe means. I haven't said anything musically that his words did not create an atmosphere that I simply wanted to live in. And then I wanted to find what the sound of that atmosphere was. But sometimes, I don't know, Joe and I we have occasion talked about a line or two, but generally I look for the atmosphere, Sarah, for that music that has to come from me. My understanding of what I think these words, not even what they're saying, but what they're indicating me toward.
Right.
It's not necessarily critical to understand what Joe or I mean as much as it is, what do you mean? What do you mean when you encounter this? What does this mean in your life when you encounter this? You put this on if you can or not. The great things summon us to participate.
And that's it right there. That summon us to participate part. That creating the listener their own story within the shared experience.
Yes, the shared experience. Their story within the shared experience. Beautiful.
I mean, sometimes people ask me literally what a song means, what's something I've written. Now, what does that mean? I'm not being flip when my response is, well, it means that it is. If there was a better way for me to say that, I would have said it, I hope. It just means there's a great story of Leonard Cohen reading a long poem on the radio. And at the end of it, the radio interviewer asked him what the poem meant. And Leonard just read the poem again. It means this. If you're asking me how that lines up with you in your life, and does it speak to my heart? Does it connect my heart to my mind? Who's to say? Nobody needs to look at a leaning oak tree and say, that lean of that tree, what does that mean? And we can talk a lot about how it happened, why it might have happened. What does it mean that it's standing there at that particular angle? It means something different to me if I live on this side of it or this other side of it.
Perspective.
Who's to say?
Right.
There's another, I'll recount this, what does it mean story, Sarah.
Okay.
There's someone asked Don McLean what American Pie meant. And he said, it means I don't have to write another song if I don't want to. There's that response too.
I co-wrote a song with Madonna that she had a big hit with. Somebody asked me at one point, what it meant, because I thought that the words might be a little cryptic. I was surprised she took it on and did something with it. They said, what does that mean? And I said, it means my children have straight teeth.
That's great. That's great. I want to talk about the first song on the album, Sleeper Car. It moves to me kind of a little bit like an Irish lullaby.
That's a good story behind it.
I'm going to read a couple of the lines. We have in our favor the time on our backs, though chasing our tails like train on the tracks. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for the song Sleeper Car?
I don't remember an inspiration other than I heard the first line. It frequently, first line just sort of appears like you discover a door standing open. Like, oh, I could nudge through this if I wanted to. I don't know what's in there. If I want to walk in there right now, I can. And I frequently do if I see a door standing open in regard to a lyric that just passes through my mind like a cloud through a sky. That song is a favorite of mine in this collection of them. And I can distinctly remember sending Mike that lyric. It was probably only the fourth song that we wrote together, I think, something like that. And I remember remember sending it to him and having a little trepidation about it because I said, well, now you're going to find out what I really do. This one is more in keeping with the way that I typically hear myself writing, witness myself writing. And I didn't know if it would add up to him or not, if it would brush him back or not, if it would feel too abstract as it landed or would it feel invitational. I really was kind of holding my breath a little bit to see what his response would be. But I also will say, as a side note, I'm delighted that you hear it with any leanings toward Ireland because we got to the music of the song. Mike had written a couple different settings, music for this set of words. And at one point, I said to him, well, I guess everything can't just be a sad Irish waltz because I feel like everything I write is asking to be a sad Irish waltz. And he said, it's funny you say that because I actually have a version that I haven't sent you that I labeled Irish waltz. And that's what you hear is the recording that he sent me. And I just added people around it once he told me that I was allowed to. But I remember that arriving and just being absolutely elated at what it felt like. At that point, I hadn't envisioned that this was on the way to becoming an album in any way. I just knew that something was happening between us that was deeply resonant for me. And that song in particular just felt so alive and to the point of what I thought the words were asking for, that I really started to believe that something was happening between Mike and I creatively that wasn't about to just wrap up.
So it was more like an evolution, like it wasn't something you guys set out to do. It was an evolution of things.
No, we just wrote a song together. Then we wrote another one. And then when we were on the fifth or sixth one, found that every time I started writing a new lyric, I found that I was doing so in anticipation of sending it to Mike. I get up like 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and I would just start routinely, often as I could, putting myself into motion, cranking something out without too much regard for what was happening, and sending it off to Mike in a text without reviewing it.
Oh, wow.
I'd read through it to make sure that I had made some tragic mistake. I wouldn't let myself worry over it or overly be precious about its state. If it just felt alive to me, I just couldn't wait to hit send on it and hear what might come back. At one point, my son, who's a wonderful musician I work with all the time and knows as much about what I do as anybody knows about what I do. At one point, Mike and I were first going. He said, Dad, don't forget that you write music too. I won't and I don't, but I'm also aware that I'm doing this because I find it completely invigorating in this collaborative mode with this man that's becoming my friend. And my son Levon understood that perfectly once I had framed it.
I wonder why he said that to you. What was his motivation, do you think?
Because he thinks I don't take myself seriously enough as a composer of music. And that's been an opinion he's held long before you and I were writing together. He thinks I don't give myself enough credit as a musician. But like when he said to you, drop the mask, Reid.
Cut the act.
Cut the act, Reid.
He said, cut the act.
He's like, you are playing music on a sophisticated level, but you don't think you are because you're self-taught and you don't, in the same way that he learned to play music, Performing Arts High School, and then at the New School for Jazz in New York.
Okay.
I learned as a primitive sitting in front of a record player. He learned language in a classroom. I learned language by being on the streets of a foreign country, needing to ask where I can get a cup of coffee and needing to learn the rudimentary parts of speech, even if I didn't know the names of the parts of speech. And he said, just because you don't know how to give words to theory in music, you're still operating as somebody who understands theory of music.
Right.
He's just wanting me to acknowledge something about what it is that I have been doing for 40 years that he thinks I disparage. And he was concerned, I think, that I was sidestepping what I do musically on my own behalf because I don't value it. And once I told him, it's not that. It's just that I'm finding really great value in this. And he understood that.
It was something new and creative. And
yeah. It was new and it was invigorating.
Yeah.
When those things are true, we're always going to walk in that direction. It's too seductive not to.
Right. I want to talk about the song, The Bridge. It's extremely symbolic and visual, and it feels reflective. And I love the poetry and lines like, for the years aren't the true tellers of time as we know. And in the line, the years have grown sullen, refusing to speak. Bonnie Raitt also adds a layer of background vocals on this song. Can you talk first about writing the song, where it was coming from? And can you share the inspiration for it? And maybe talk a little bit about getting Bonnie on it as well.
Sure. This was the second song we wrote together. I wrote it sitting on a tarmac in a plane in Dublin. My wife Melanie and I were staying with a dear friend in Dublin who had lost his young wife to a very aggressive cancer. She was very young, maybe 34, something like that. He told Mel and I both the story the night before we left, that when they were first understanding themselves to be growing into a relationship, a rare snowstorm snowstorm was destined to hit Dublin, and the local municipality demanded that everybody stay sheltered in their homes and not go out that night. But they went out and they walked in the silent city that was being covered over in snow and stood on a bridge together where they exchanged their first kiss.
Aww.
And then they went on to marry. She passed. But the fact that they went out on this magical night after being told in no uncertain terms not to go out and stood on this bridge together, I didn't bank that and think, oh, I want to write a song about that. I just sat on the tarmac and opened my notebook and just there it was.
Yeah.
It just, as quick as I could write it down, I don't remember changing anything. I don't remember refining it much at all. As far as Bonnie's appearance, Bonnie has a lot of affection for us both, independent of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when she found out that we were writing together, she texted me and said, are you really writing with Mike? And I said, yeah, and I'm making a record around him. She said, well, if you need any singing, you'll let me know. And I said, I'm going to give you one moment to retract that because I'm not going to be casual about it. If you mean that, we absolutely want your voice somewhere. And I told Mike about this and he said, the bridge immediately comes to mind. And I said, well, for me too. Let's send her that and see if it's resonant for her. And it was. And she threw herself into it. There's a moment, Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a podcast that's about the wisdom of older women. I forget what it's called. I think it's called Wiser Than Me, maybe.
Okay.
And if you listen to her interview with Bonnie Raitt, at the very end, Bonnie tells Julia that she has to go because she's promised me and Mike that she is going to sing on a song, and that's the evening that she's doing it.
Oh, wow, cool.
Memorialized at the end of this podcast that we both get a shout out on, between her and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who I think is wonderful because she was on her way to find her way into the song for us, and she really did.
That's really cool. I'll have to find that. So, Mike, what was it like? I want to know from your end of just getting these texts of poetry from Joe. Tell a little bit of your story on that end.
Sarah, I got a lot of tread worn off the tire. Let's put it that way, okay?
I'm sure we have no idea what he's talking about.
And so I want to hope I am direct with you and whoever I'm talking to.
Yeah.
I find as I get older that I am attempting, or I do better by eschewing. Is that the word, Joe? Getting rid of?
Eschewing.
Eschewing? Does that mean
kind of avoiding
judgment?
Yeah.
So the last thing I would do, very much like encountering, look, I've read Wallace Stevens' poetry, for 40 years. I understand 5-10% of it. I couldn't make an argument about why it's great or why it isn't. So when I would receive words from Joe, I'm thinking about where I am in my little workroom there at the house or in the garage off the house. And when I would open a lyric for Joe, I wouldn't make any judgments about it. What I would do was try to stay away from the piano, see if I can't hear before my hands go, because your hands, if you do this a long time, your hands, they have a desire to go to comfortable places, familiar places. First thing I would do is say, can I hear what the atmosphere, I keep using that word, I can't think of a better word, Sarah, what the atmosphere of the tale of these words might be. And it's not always. Sometimes when Mike is there, Mike's doing the work, we almost never agree on one of those being the right day. Sarah, if I listen for it, it's when I'm out of the way. The great playwright Arthur Miller referred to what he called the hidden narrative. The most creator can do, there's no way to really get close to that hidden narrative, but when you are. You can only sense it. The difference between Death of a Salesman and one of his other plays that he thought didn't work as well. It's a mystery why that happened, And so whenever I'm out of the way, and it's just, sometimes I'll take one of Joe's lyrics for a walk around the yard and get out in nature with it. Make sure I'm out in nature and not cooped up in a room, but out among trees and be with this thing. I think the bridge, that was pretty much the first version.
That was the only version that I ever heard.
I think that's the only version. That felt, by the end of that, I did a few repeating lines that felt like that was right. Sleeper Car, that's like the third version. I think the first version was an up-tempo one. I think I said to you, Joe, everything can't be a sad Irish waltz. You said, well, I'm afraid so. So
you're going to work with me, it is.
Yeah. I saw a wonderful interview between the great screenwriter, William Goldman, talking about screenwriting. He said he had only written, trying to make the case that he didn't know what he was doing when he wrote. And then he went on further to say about conversation he had with Stephen Sondheim. And Goldman said, because Goldman believed that there were only 2 of his screenplays that he thought were really, really good. The others worked and they were fine, but one was Princess Bride, and I can't remember what the other one was. But he asked Sondheim, Steve, when you write, do you know what you're doing? And Sondheim said, absolutely not. No, I have no idea what I'm doing. He said, if I did, I would have never written a bad song, right? And I've written a bad song. So I loved hearing that. I loved hearing that. You know, I remember reading, Sarah, a long, long time ago that Haydn in the morning, and when he would get up in the morning, he would teach a student, and then before he had breakfast, he would sit at some sort of keyboard, and he would doodle and improvise until he heard something he liked. And I thought, that's what I do. This is Joseph Haydn, for Pete's sake. So it's a tough thing to talk about. I like to try to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I've sent Joe some things where I thought, oh, that's really clever. He's really gonna. And he never ever says, no, that doesn't work, or no, that's not any good. He'll say, well, Michael, is there anything else maybe? I'm not sure. Let me live with. And when he says, okay, let me live with this, I know, nope. That's not it, Mike. And I never go right back to it that day, Sarah. I always give it a day and a night's sleep before I go back with that.
The title track, Life and Time, it feels close to the heart, and then like someone you would know at the same time. It's so encompassing. I really love that song. A couple of lines that really stuck out to me were, I made my peace with solitude as years pushed on and by, but held your face as grace itself upon my life and time. And I love that line. And then also moving like the ghost that I've become within my mind, where I've spent my days with you throughout my life and time. That story and those lines just hit me. Can you talk a little bit about writing that, Joe?
Sure. Thank you for those kind words, Sarah. I can recall once it kind of started happening that I thought that it might work sort of like a great Jimmy Webb song works, that with some very simple lines gestured towards a complex life. I think that songs like Wichita Lineman and Galveston do that. They're giving you just enough detail to feel invested in who this character is.
I love that.
Not nailing closed the doors and windows that insist that there's only one way in and out of this song. In this experience of a story, I felt this character clearly fleeing some part of his life that had gone amiss, that had gone awry, carrying this unrequited love, and then realizing that he wasn't just waiting for an idea of his life to happen with this unrequited love he's carrying around, but the unrequited love itself was what his life had become and would likely remain. And finding some way to make peace with this hurt, this void. It's not about filling it. It's about learning to live with it and abide with it. Again, it's the great mystery that we learn to abide, not dispel. It's impossible to dispel. We have to make some peace with how we stand with the unknowable. And this person doesn't exactly know how to stand. He doesn't know why his life hasn't come together exactly as he had imagined and hoped and dreamed, but is making some stride toward acceptance.
I love that lyric, Sarah. I'm so happy you brought that up. But to underscore the idea of opening up the bags of our own lives on something.
Yeah.
The second verse is just one of my favorite verses in the record. I know well what people say when I go to town, though I keep my business straight, hold my head.
I hold my tongue.
Hold my tongue and my head down. Hope I remember them better than that tomorrow night.
You'll have melody carrying you along.
Right.
You'll be surfing.
Sarah, I'll tell you, maybe this is giving something away, Joe, that you won't like.
By me.
I know well what people say when I go to town, though I keep my business straight, hold my tongue and my head down. I got this incredible vision out of McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Perfect.
The movie.
Oh my God. One of my favorite movies.
Yeah. I got this image of this guy because this is clearly a guy who's experiencing elements of alienation. Can you imagine? He's walking through, and I imagine this little McCabe and Mrs. Miller town. I know well what people say when I go to town.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I keep my business straight, hold my tongue and my head down. That's a guy who's, he's not waving to everyone that he passes.
Yeah.
Oh, how you doing? No, he's a protected guy.
No, I picture that same. That's why I think the setting is up north, crossing from Michigan into Canada.
Yeah.
I pictured that same kind of wintry isolation.
Right. Wintry isolation.
I picture it at winter. I can see Warren Beatty in his beat up bowler and absurd raccoon coat.
There's scenes in
hobbling his way through the snow.
Yeah, there's just scenes in that movie that your lyric invoked for me.
And, the Leonard Cohen songs that become the score of that.
Oh, see, I had forgotten all about the Leonard Cohen song.
Stranger song that gets used like 5 times.
I completely forgot that.
And that tonality matches completely that landscape that you're imagining. That's what makes it feel so lonesome.
Right.
True that all the men were dealers who said they were through with dealing in the holy game of poker. Well, he was just some Joseph looking for a manger. Come on. He must have laughed out out loud. He must have laughed his ass off when he wrote that. Because it's so good. Laugh of recognition. If I write something that I know is really good, I laugh out loud. That's why I tend to think almost every song I write in some way is funny. And I learned from people who listen to me that they don't necessarily think my songs are funny. They think they're really serious. I mean, I'm serious about them. My intention is absolutely serious. But there's something that I always find in a successful song for me that makes me laugh because it's come together like I'm a safecracker and that third tumbler has fallen. And just go, I laugh because it's happened. Not laugh because I think this is a funny song, a funny situation. I take delight in the fact that somehow it's appeared in a way that makes me vibrate, makes me feel a vibration that tells me it's alive.
Resonates.
I like his phrase, Sarah, when he says it's a laughter of recognition that something is working and really, really good. Sarah, I've never had that moment. When I stumble onto something that works, the most emotion I can conjure is relief. Yeah. It's never
When you came out the morning after you had recorded your demo of I Can't Make You Love Me, and you realized that you had punched out one chord early and left that incredibly last chord that is genius as it lands. You didn't just laugh at what had just happened and how perfect it was?
No. He's referring to the last chord of I Can't Make You Love Me. And the reason that happened was people that are hearing will know that if they're tech savvy, you can put a load of piano track into the computer and then you can move the key around. If you go too far, you're going to have to revoice. But so it was between D and C, so I scrolled and I was in C and I said, oh, that's too low. So I scrolled across and bumped it up to D. The only thing I did is I didn't scroll over far enough. So I left the last chord in C. That genius that Joe is talking about was a computer error, was a technical mistake on my part. So it was 6:00 at night, and Susie said, dinner's ready. And I said, oh, I got to fix that. And then I thought, some little voice said, oh, Lee, check that in the morning. And so then I came down in the morning when I heard that chord, I said, genius.
Wow.
And I've had horn players, jazz players that have done that song and say to me, Reid, that's a good song, but man, that last chord, how'd you come up with that? And I just say, sometimes, inspiration strikes. I don't ever, until now, I don't tell the truth about it.
That is amazing. I love that. Oh, wow. Wow.
There's so many great things that come out of so-called mistakes. I've spent a lot of my life as a producer trying to convince artists not to fix things just because they happened differently than they anticipated. And so before you call that vocal moment, that break in your voice a mistake, just because you didn't mean for that to happen, can we just take a minute and listen to dramatically what happens when I hear that? That it jars me completely out of complacency. If it is a distraction, absolutely we'll fix it. But we're not going to just fix it out of hand because a lot of shit happens that we don't intend that is incredibly useful. And I just spent a lot of time protecting what had happened unexpectedly so that we can evaluate whether it's musical or not, whether it's dynamic in a helpful way or not, before we fix the damn thing just because it wasn't what you expected.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Beautiful things can come out of confinement or limited resources. In this sense, I think the most effective movie score, just for my opinion, nothing more than that, is Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho. If you ever heard that, you can find a recording by the Royal National Scottish Orchestra where they play it as an orchestral suite, and it stands alone as great music, even aside from the movie. And the reason it was strings is because they didn't have the money for any other instrument. Hitchcock was out of money. They were limited budget. And Herrmann said, well, how about we'll do strings and we'll multi-track them when we need to. Out of that came that score. So if you put great creators in confined spaces, they find ways to do wonderful things.
Well, that great quote from Bernstein. I'm repeating it constantly, where he says the recipe for greatness is a good idea and not quite enough time.
Yeah.
That's why when I produce records, they most frequently happen in 3 and 4 days. Not only the fact that, I'm rarely given a budget that would allow a session to go on for 2 weeks or months, or I have people in my life who've spent years making records, certainly months and months. I've never known such a rarity. And frankly, I don't want to know about it, because what happens is when there's limited time, it just insists that people are fully committed in real time to what we're doing. And it brings a certain focus to bear. It insists on it. Amazing things happen, especially when you get to tell people, no, we don't have time to fix that. We're moving on. Because I know know that if it felt like it was hovering off the ground, if it changed the course of, the direction of blood flowing in my body, that we have something valuable. And I'm going to do whatever I can to protect its sovereignty from some poor soul who just wants to fix everything. Just because we can. We have favorite records, all of us, where there are so-called mistakes all over the place.
Yeah.
Records were being made right now, they'd get fixed because with a computer, there's almost nothing you can't address. And a lot of things that I live for in recorded music would be fixed if that had been the capability. And I'm grateful that they weren't allowed to. They didn't know how to. Rushes in tempo and things like that people say, oh, see, that's why we should have used a click. I say that's exactly why I never use one, because there are times in life when things do speed up. It's not automatically unmusical that has happened. Sometimes, listen to Tangled Up in Blue. Listen to it on a CD and you get to the very end and you can immediately hit a button and it starts over. You won't believe how much the tempo has raced. But if you listen to the story, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it? There's a momentum. There's a snowball tumbling down a hill of a narrative shaping. Why wouldn't this thing start speeding?
Yeah.
The idea that somebody would just think, that's got to be sorted out. I don't want to be in the room when that happens. That's tragedy.
Yeah. Well, Mike and Joe, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and doing this interview. It's been so inspiring for me, I know, as a writer. So I know a lot of people are going to get a lot from this interview as well.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful question, Sarah, too. Wonderful. Yeah,
well,
thank you.
I appreciate it. And I encourage everybody to go check out Mike Reid and Joe Henry's new album, Life and Time, out now. It's a great piece of work. And thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening to AmericanaMusic.com podcast. Be sure to go to AmericanaMusic.com and find playlists of the Americana artists we've interviewed here. Also, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.